Morning, y'all. It is time for um, the Wednesday morning devotional. I hope y'all are doing well. Um, Today's devotional is once again from creation to Revelation. And this week is about the aftermath of creation. Creation, like Amanda said, is all good. And then the next several chapters of Genesis, not so much. It's the fall. It's Cain and Abel. It's the Tower of Babel. It's the flood. All these bad things that human beings uh, endured and committed and did. And one of the interesting things, the writing style of the author is he constantly says we, puts us in the story. Um, so, and the point is so that we, being you and me, and people reading today, that we see ourselves in the story because the Bible is a story of humankind relating to God and God redeeming humankind. But it's our story. And, when you're reading a book, if you can't relate to a character, boring. But imagine that fiction book that's, the narrative driven book you've read that you really related to a character and how much more likely you are to get into the story and how exciting that story is. And so I want to challenge us as we're reading the stories of Scripture, particularly the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, but also the narratives in the New Testament. Find yourself in that story. We may not all be, murderers of our kin, like Cain. We might not all talk to snakes like Eve and Adam. We might not all have a big boat and endure 40 days of rain, although good night, the last 7, 8, I don't even know how long it's been. It's kind of been like that. We've all been a giant boat and floating in the middle of, the water. But let us see ourselves in Scripture, and that does a couple things. Is it makes us relate to humankind, because if you look at the stories of the Old Testament, particularly Israel, and from our perspective, we're like, man, Israelites are just dumb. They don't remember what God did, yada yada yada. And I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. We are just as dumb as Israel. We constantly forget what God has done for us in the past. And the same situation happens, and it's like, oh, what am I going to do? How is God going to provide? Well, God will provide like God always provides. God will intervene the way God always intervenes. God will save us. So as we're reading the Old Testament, let's see ourselves in those characters, in those stories. And so one, it helps us to relate and helps us to be honest about, who we are. We're not perfect. We have faults, and we get to see our faults and mistakes played out on a story scale in the Old Testament. But two, it gives us hope, because if we see ourselves in the stories of Scripture, we see ourselves as a people in need of redemption, in need of saving. And Jesus did just that. So if we see ourselves as, the characters of Scripture, as the apostles being taught by Jesus, as the early church being saved by Jesus, we get hope. So if we see ourselves, we put ourselves in the stories. If we see ourselves in the stories, we relate to them, and we get more out of them, and we get moral lessons. We learn more about ourselves. But two, we also learn more about Jesus. Just as Jesus came to be the Messiah of the Hebrew Jewish people, Jesus is our Messiah as well. Just as, the psalmist, you picked me up out of the pit, you gave me life. God has done that for us as well. And so we can relate to that. So I just want to encourage you to read more if you have time. Yay! And don't just read the latest, whatever, book you might be reading, but also just read, we always stay away from the Old Testament sometimes. We just stick with the Gospels or maybe with Acts or something. Um, but dive into the Old Testament, dive into the histories and the stories of God and God's people, and um, how, people constantly failed, but God never did. God always came through. God always protected and took care of um, the people, maybe not in ways that you expect or that they expected, but then see yourselves in those stories and see how God protects you and protects us and comes through and is always faithful, even when we're not. So thank you. Have a great day. Get outside. I am taking our new dog for a walk today, so on my lunch hike. So I'm probably not going to get the normal miles I get, as he is probably going to smell anything and everything he can in this new park. But get out, enjoy yourselves today, and blessings. Thanks.